This is Helga. These are the Debbies. The Debbies all tried very hard to be the same. Helga was an endless source of amusement to the Debbies. Even though Helga was different, she had somehow convinced herself that there was a place in society for her. The Debbies sought to destroy Helga's glimmer of hope to one day fit in. Helga became obsessed with the thought of revenge. Helga disguised herself as a Debbie and mingled among them. Once inside the clique, Helga began studying their itty-bitty thoughts and their migration patterns. Over lunch, the Debbies decided to have a slumber party at Debbie's house. They ate pizza, painted their toenails pink, giggled, and talked about Matthew Kelly's excellent butt cheeks. While the Debbies slept, Helga snipped off their annoying little heads. Then, she ate all of the pizza crusts. The end. This was an excerpt from Creepy Susie and 13 Other Tragic Tales for Troubled Children, a parody children's book by Angus Oblong that featured heavy adult themes and a deeply disturbed sense of dark humor. It was, to make an understatement, a very weird book. And weird is good. Because there's nothing quite as boring as a normal book, or a normal show, or a normal person. Normal means that you fit in, that you're inoffensive, that you make absolutely sure not to say anything disagreeable by not saying anything at all. A book like Creepy Susie is something that expresses a frustration with the mainstream appeal of so much in the world. A mainstream appeal that, at the time, networks were just beginning to see the repetition in. Like most of the videos I make about shows from the early aughts, The Oblongs was originally picked up to compete with The Simpsons, the sarcastic social commentary of that show that intentionally went against the grain as it possibly could, and it was garnering enough success that executives wanted a piece of the pie. So there was actually a three-way bidding war for the rights to Angus Oblong's weird book so it could be adapted to a TV show. Warner Brothers won the bidding war and picked it up for a season. Then it got moved from timeslot to timeslot before being quietly cancelled after airing only 8 episodes. The Oblongs would later be picked up by Adult Swim, who aired the rest of the show on its network, fitting in with the rest of the weird media that found a home there. What's notable about The Oblongs is how high the expectations seemed to be. It was meant to fight against The Simpsons and had the matching star power behind it, including a theme by They Might Be Giants and the voice talents of Billy West, Pamela Adlon, Gene Smart, and of course, Will Ferrell. But it was not the kind of show that was ever meant to air on a mainstream channel or find mainstream appeal. The Oblongs was, from the outset, far too abnormal to ever get that sort of niche, and this should not have come as a surprise given its origins. Creepy Susie was a very dark book, written by a very weird guy. Angus Oblong is notable for making public appearances wearing Juggalo face paint. His work was far too depressing to possibly air alongside the more sanitized and upbeat tone of so much other television, and to try to force it to conform would lose so much of what made it unique. Even after toning so much down, it still stood out for how bleak the show's premise was, and paradoxically how optimistic an outlook on life it still espoused. The dichotomy between what the cast went through and how they reacted to that was built on the strong foundation of its characters, who are as follows. Milo Oblong is generally the main character, or at least the character with the most screen time. He's manic to an extreme sense with more personality disorders than personality, but is still generally defined by trying to do what he views as right. He clashes with the others through his defiance pretty often. Whenever he has a scheme to visit the hills, the others try to stop him, citing the danger, which he ignores to rope them along. In a setting so defined by its characters willing to accept the status quo, it often takes a bit of insanity to challenge society's ways, even if there's nothing that can be done. This is as much an aspect of the show's resetting continuity as it is an aspect of the show's setting, and the extreme extent to which it satirizes real inequalities. But rather than having Milo come across as naive for this sort of thinking, he instead gets vindicated by each happy ending. Just because you can't fix things doesn't mean there's no value to trying. Milo lives with his family, including Biff and Chip Oblong, conjoined twins who share nearly everything about their personality, though not their interests. Biff is on the school's wrestling team, while Chip is more interested in the ladies, and there's an implication made throughout the show that Biff is bisexual, with Chip being straight to add awkwardness. But one thing that they both hate is their younger brother Milo, who they torment constantly, though this is in line with their rudeness towards everyone else, usually punctuated by a high five. They're able to go into trances to give the other some privacy. There's also Beth Oblong, the baby of the family. She's a relatively normal child, if not a bit too precocious for her own good. The only abnormal part of her physique is a growth on the top of her head, though she's still treated as a valley child just the same, as the prejudice in this show has very little to do with personality or disability, but rather one's place of birth. Bob Oblong is the father of the household, representative of everything good and patriotic about America in a way that reeks of ideological idealism. He's a blind stereotype of the fatherly figures represented in media of the saccharine age of television, always eager to give advice to his children and leading them by example. And therein lies the irony. He has no arms and no legs while living next to a toxic waste dump. The image of the American dream had started to shatter by this age, and John Walton Sr. had become Homer Simpson, as the American public no longer wanted escapism, but a mirror. So Bob Oblong resurrects this old and dead stereotype with the surrounding tone being a flaming pile of wreckage, and the new context creates a completely different image of society. For an upper-middle-class family to huddle around the dinner table and talk about how great things are is one thing, but for a man who's been treated horribly by life at every turn to espouse the same optimism shows off a much stronger personality. It's easy to be nice when the world is nice to you. It's nearly impossible to be nice if you have no reason to be, but Bob Oblong manages it anyway. His loving wife is Marie Pickles Oblong, who once lived in the hills above the valley alongside all the rich, well-off folks. But when she met Bob, she threw away all the privilege she'd known to live a life of unconditional love. She then began to chain smoke and drink heavily, a combination of coping mechanisms as well as something she can now do without judgment from her neighbors. Just as the American dream was beginning to be made fun of on television with an inflow of sardonic pessimism, the family relationships were also starting to fall apart. The loving family was a part of that mythos, and so it had to go. So many shows portrayed dysfunction as they were trying to board the good ship Simpson without fully understanding why it was seaworthy. As such, the TV wife was no longer cooked or cleaned, and she resented her spouse, while the husband was lazy and inattentive. So how do you make characters who are the opposite of trends in mainstream media? You make them like each other. Bob and Pickles' love for one another is one of the few unquestionable dynamics among the characters. And this stands in stark contrast to the relationship of George and Pristine Climmer. They are the You Are Hill people, the perfect mansion, the perfect Stepford smiles, all while being the most toxic, judgmental people imaginable. George is the CEO of Globicide, and his introduction has him taunting Bob for being too poor to afford to leave the valley, saying that he simply should have been born rich, conflating a lack of wealth with a moral failure, as though Bob weren't one of the most upstanding people in the entire show, while George himself is willing to let people die for a few pennies more. Pristine Climmer is his wife, and almost exclusively defined through the way in which she fits in with the others. She's totally satisfied with anyone who fits into the extremely high standards she places on them, even willing to accept Helga as a Debbie, purely because she briefly has the confidence to attempt to blend in. She's just as neurotic as any of the Valley folks, but has the decency to hide it and the lack of shame to shame others for it. Elsewhere on the hills are Jared and Blaine, a duo of popular boys always seen together. The show makes several gay jokes at their expense, though much of the humor is derived more so from their reactions to these accusations than anything else. They exist mostly to antagonize Milo's friends, and to give an outlet for the general disdain that the rich have for the less fortunate throughout the series. They are residents alongside the Debbies, a group of identical blondes who first appeared in the Creepy Susie shorts. They're the icons of conformity taken to a logical extreme, as they dress the same, act the same, and take part in the same hobbies at the same time, and defame anyone who's not part of their in-group, whose membership is defined by aligning oneself with a list of totally arbitrary ideals of which they themselves aren't even sure on. That Helga was twice able to infiltrate the group simply by acting like she belonged is telling of this mentality. Helga Fugly is a Valley resident in denial. She considers herself on par with the Debbies, only deigning to spend time around the others out of pity, or an unacknowledged acceptance of her place. The narrative makes multiple bad-natured jokes about her appearance and hygiene, which is uncharacteristic of the otherwise selective character denigration that it maintains. Only bad people are shamed for their physical appearance. But then again, that's the point. The narrative will poke fun at Pickles for her lack of hair, or Bob for his lack of limbs, but these jokes all come across as the type of joke that the characters themselves would acknowledge. After all, it's much harder to make fun of a person who's too willing to laugh with you when you laugh at them. But because Helga is in such a great amount of denial, the writing is able to get in the same digs at her that it does to the Hill residents, with the shame coming not so much from her obesity, but lack of self-awareness about such. She is joined by the other members of Milo's circle, Creepy Susie, who was somewhat of a breakout character iconic since her titular role in the books on which the series was based. She doesn't seem to have anything wrong with her except for a sardonic and depressive personality and a propensity for black humor, unless you consider being French to be a handicap. There's also Peggy, the one-breasted girl missing a jaw with an endless supply of optimism and dreams of marrying a speech therapist. And Mikey, a boy with an unfortunately shaped buttocks who somehow manages to be the butt, pun partially intended, of any slapstick that occurs. The rest of the Valley residents are similar to the others, all being misfit in some way and deformed as a result rather than as a cause. Because it's not as though the Valley residents are outcast because of their deformities, but rather, they're deformed because they are outcasts. The mutations occur because they can't afford to live away from the toxic waste dumps. They can't afford to move away from the toxic waste dumps because they're never given the chances to work their way up, and they're not given those chances because the hill residents resent their deformities. Milo does, at one point, manage to make it to the level of popularity that the hill residents enjoy, and is accepted by all purely because they see others doing it. Pickles herself was once a hill resident, but moved away for love and to get far from the others' judgmental attitudes. Bob gets robotic limbs in one episode, and he too is immediately accepted as a hill folk. And when one Debbie is disfigured, years of acceptance as one of the in-crowd are thrown down to the Valley alongside the girl herself. It goes to show that the prejudices are totally arbitrary. The hill people are accepted because they are accepted. The Valley is rejected because others reject them. Or at least, the haves do. The have-nots seem to take care of their own. The prejudices are all very much one-sided. It's the hill residents who have an issue with associating with the others. The Valley has no such reservations. Even Pickles, who rejected that lifestyle, still interacts with the others as much as she's required to. Her dislike of the in-crowd is on a person-by-person basis. She's more than willing to be cordial with the hill residents who don't outwardly show her hostility. The Valley residents are open and accepting with each other, as well. There are a lot of gay jokes in the show, typical for something that aired in the early aughts, but what's atypical is how many jokes about queer groups are bad-natured when it comes to the queerness itself. Anita is a non-passing transgender woman who everyone in the Valley treats as a woman. If someone reacts with disgust at her body, the joke is on their reaction, as Anita's confidence makes the remarks pass over her. This is compared to characters like Blaine and Jared, whose implied homosexuality is always portrayed negatively, not because they're gay teenagers, but because they're gay, homophobic teenagers. Of course, Biff and Chip are equally homophobic as they make prudish remarks about each other, but they stop at the language itself. Biff is openly bisexual and just as willing to laugh about that as the others are willing to be the butt of the joke that life played onto them. Episode recaps. Misfit Love. Bob is told that he will lose his company coverage if he makes another claim, and if he does so, Milo will have to go to normal school, as they will no longer be able to afford to send him to the special classes he's in. Despite trying to get injured on purpose, it's eventually a tree crushing his brother that does it, and Milo gets to go to class with the regular kids. He quickly learns that Valley kids are at the bottom of the social hierarchy, which is an issue as he's fallen in love with a girl named Yvette, who hangs out with the Debbies despite having the appearance of a cray alien. Milo manages to get time alone with her despite the beatings he receives from the hill kids, which causes Bob discomfort as he knows he can't afford to have Milo patched up after every fight he loses. But when Pickles expresses her anger that Bob won't let his son stand up for himself, mirroring the way he won't stand up for himself when she's hit on, she goes to a bar to pout, a bar that Bob was recently threatened to stay away from when the little people from the dwarf-tossing event felt he was encroaching on their territory. But Bob inspires Milo to fight back as he himself stands up to his own bullies, and eventually earns their acceptance, though Milo's treehouse is burnt down and, assuming that he's dead, Yvette blows herself up due to no longer having a test subject. Narcoleptic Scotty. Milo's ADHD is making him more hyperactive than usual, so his parents try various forms of animal therapy before winding up with a dog named Scotty. But the dog is just as hyperactive as Milo himself, and he's forced to give it away, with the Climber family taking him in. The dog is spoiled for a while, which Milo confirms when he sneaks in to check on it, but when the Debbies grow sick of the pet, George moves it to Globoside's animal testing facility, where an experimental cologne gives the dog narcolepsy. Bob discovers this during his work and blabs to the entire family, which causes Milo to demand that they take action to break him out. The family sneaks into Globoside's headquarters, splitting up as they all make their search with Milo and Bob finding the dog alongside all the other animals. They free the pack, though George catches them in the act and duels the dog in a showdown that results in him being blown up by one of his own faulty products. In the end, the narcoleptic version of Scotty ends up being much more low energy, which spreads to Milo, making him into a proper therapy dog. Milo Interrupted. The Valley kids go to the hills to try to catch fireflies that aren't dying from pollution, but when the hills kids see them, they chase the group, and the window is broken as collateral. So the mayor brings in Miss Hubbard, a gun-toting Bible thumper, to investigate the valley for dysfunctional families. She drops off literature at the Oblong household, which Bob takes to, and eventually suspects that Milo is doing drugs, the other kind. Though the truth is that he's been helping Helga around the house after learning that she has no parents, in order to prevent Miss Hubbard from sending his friend to an orphanage. But Miss Hubbard eventually learns of this anyway, and tries to adopt Helga, which causes the family to try to claim that she's a misfit parent, though none of their attempts at rescuing Helga work until Milo is finally able to overcome his ADD long enough to track down Helga's original parents, trapped on an ice floe after their plane crashed. Bucketheads. Milo is embarrassed by how lame his parents are at a parent-teacher conference night and wants to have some cool clothes to compensate, though the outfit he wants, created by one Tommy Vinegar, is far too expensive, and Pickles sends him to school in a trash bag and bucket hat. But one of the cool kids compliments his hat, and the next day, the whole class is wearing one. He's confused about why it caught on, and Pickles tells him that it's all about confidence, revealing that she used to date Tommy Vinegar and taught him everything he knows. So she puts a ham sticker on his bucket, and the next day, ham buckets are all the rage due to Milo's confidence. When Hill kids start paying money for the outfits, Pickles gets the idea to use Milo to push new fashion ideas and profit off of them, but the new popularity goes to his head, and he starts his own competing line. Though once his fashion show flops, Milo returns home defeated, where his parents accept him with open arms, just in time for Tommy Vinegar to arrive and offer to buy the entire stock of Pickles' new perfume, once she reveals that she doesn't care he doesn't like it, and she uses the new money to buy the school a new stove. Heroin Addict. Pickles wants to buy a new playset for Beth, but it's far outside the family's price range. But once she learns of a contest to win an all-you-can-shop spree at the mall from a pack of cigarettes, she has the family work with her to smoke as much as possible until she wins. But on the day of the shopping spree, she's far too out of shape from all the smoking to do anything, and she gets nothing. So Pickles swears off of smoking for good, though she struggles to cope until joining a gym to burn off some of the pent-up energy, where she discovers a knack for boxing. This leads to taking on more and more fights, and eventually more extreme challenges, which culminates in Pickles learning about base jumping, vowing to jump off the top of the Globoside HQ building. But her family is concerned about her, and they all rush to try to convince her to stop, only for Beth to be abducted by an eagle, so Pickles jumps to save her. In the end, Beth is saved, but Pickles realizes that the brief moment she thought she had lost her daughter was how her family felt every time she defied death, and she decides to take up smoking once more because that hasn't killed her yet. The Golden Child. Milo gets a bottle of energy drink for free from spending so much time at the arcade, and gets the idea to make his own energy drink so he can afford to spend even more money there. His drink, Manic, is wildly successful, and it soon becomes a craze among Valley Hills, spreading even to the Globoside workers. But when George Clymer catches wind of the new miracle drink that's been energizing his workforce, he compels Bob to sell him the formula. But the guilt of stealing his son's idea causes him to give Milo the credit. Milo is taken in as a presumed corporate messiah, destined to make record profits for Globoside. But all the time he spends being groomed for the CEO position means he can't spend time around friends and family. And when Bob realizes that Milo is only partaking in the corporate world to make his dad proud, he tries to get his son back, but is turned away as he signed a contract. But the new batch of Manic isn't as successful as the original product, and Bob investigates why, learning that the original energy drink was bottled in old morphine containers. With the new revelation that Milo is not a marketing genius but a drug peddler, Bob is able to convince the directors to let him go free, and they return to their happy, impoverished lives. Flush, Sweet Helga. Debbie is throwing a birthday party that makes a point not to invite any of the Valley kids, though they sneak in to watch it anyway. Once the partygoers leave to watch a fireworks show, Milo and his friends start to enjoy the unattended party, only for Helga to steal Debbie's birthday present, a locket, which falls into the sewer when the hill folks try to get it back. She jumps in after it, but is lodged in a pipe, so a massive rescue effort is made which results in them successfully rescuing the locket, but not Helga. Eventually, her being lodged in the pipe causes the valley to lose water pressure, and no one has access to running water except the Oblongs. Their house becomes overcrowded as they try to share the water with everyone else, so Bob comes up with a plan to use pressure to dislodge Helga. This doesn't work as intended, and she's merely pushed into a different pipe, this time becoming lodged in the pipes further up and cutting off water to the hills as well. Once more, the Oblong household is spared, but the hill folks use eminent domain to seize their toilet. During their pleas for a bit of dignity, Pickles tosses her lit cigarette to the ground, which ignites the polluted water and erupts Helga out of the sewers, just in time to crush Debbie after she gets her locket back from the jewelers, where once again it falls into the sewer. Disfigured Debbie. Tired of the school being run by the Debbies, Milo decides to run against her for student council president. His campaign strategy is to appeal to the freaks of the world, as they outnumber the Hill residents, and on the day of the election, they all come out in full force to vote for Debbie anyway. But as she's accepting her position, she falls into a thresher and is ground up. The whole town comes out to mourn her loss, but George and Christine invite the Oblong family to their home with the intention of asking for advice, as Debbie survived the incident but is horribly maimed. She resents the Oblong family that she's forced to live with and sneaks out to return to her friends, the other Debbies, only for them to reject her, as she no longer looks like them. With nowhere else to turn to, she accepts the Valley residents, and is soon accepted in return. But the longer she stays with the Oblongs, the more she grates on them, until they eventually decide that she's too annoying to keep around. So they have the school nurse perform plastic surgery on her until she is back to normal, where she's immediately accepted by her old group and goes back to hating the Valley kids just as before. Pickles' Little Amazons. Pickles forgets Beth at the grocery store and tries to take the family out to the botanical gardens to make up for her lack of parental affection, but she loses Beth there too and gets arrested for being an unfit mother, sentenced to 200 hours of community service as a den mother for a Little Amazon group, a Girl Scout stand-in. She's not thrilled about the responsibility until Pristine starts to denigrate her for her ineptitude, so Pickles teaches her den how to raise money in the big city by swindling folks until they raise enough to go to the jamboree. Though once there, they fail at the outdoorswomany challenges and are disqualified. On the way home, they're kicked off the bus when the driver grows sick of the Debbies, and they wind up in the middle of the city, though Pickles' teachings about urban survival kick in, and the Valley group is able to navigate the way home, guiding the Hill girls home as well. In the end, Pickles' whole troop is reinstated and she is given a medal, only to immediately quit because her community service hours are up. Get off my back. The Hill families are having a bulk pickup, and the Valley folks show up to scavenge their trash. While out there, Biff and Chip are embarrassed by some of the Hill teens, and they get the idea to enter a two-man triathlon to bolster their confidence and show up the hills. But Biff, Chip, and Milo are fighting over Milo going into the twins' room and dive into one of Bob's projects, causing Milo to become superglued to their back. He annoys the twins with his presence at first, though when he helps Chip out on a date, that half of the conjoined twin starts to realize that he's pretty cool, and the two grow closer emotionally. Biff starts to feel as though he's left out as Chip and Milo blow off their training until, while swimming, the toxic waste in the water causes Milo to separate. But when Chip continues to hang out with Milo, Biff gives up on the triathlon, so Milo and Chip join as a duo, only for Milo to get injured in the bike race. Biff and Chip then set aside their differences and rejoin, only to lose by far as they hadn't really practiced. In the end, they blame Milo for the loss and go back to beating him up like before. In the B-plot, Beth keeps trying to attach herself to things as she's jealous of the attention that the others are getting. Please be genital. Bob goes to the bachelor party of his friend James, only to have his genitals stepped on by a stripper, which leaves him unable to have sex for 2 weeks. He tries to hide this from Pickles, who starts to suspect an affair, though when she learns the truth, finds out that it's even worse. Without sex in their marriage, she struggles to see what the two have in common. So she tries to find out what it was that originally brought them together, despite her being from the hills and him from the valley. They try to rekindle that spark by hooking up James and Anita. James's first wife was mail order and died in transit. But they don't find anything there either. Meanwhile, Milo has been struggling to sleep without the noises of lovemaking in the adjacent room, and in his sleep-deprived state, starts to search for a source of white noise, which he finds in the bathroom tap. This floods the house, with Pickles and Bob rushing to the aid of their kids, only to learn that it's their family that binds the two together. And upon realizing this, and that the 2 weeks are up, they reunite, the sounds of which rock Milo to bed. My name is Robbie. The family attends a Globoside amusement park where Bob is too short to go on any of the rides, but he gets tired of all the waiting around and sneaks on anyway, only to get his jaw injured, rendering him unable to work. After a few days of moping, Globoside arrives with a suit of robotic limbs to prevent a lawsuit, and Bob finds newfound confidence with his mobility and height. So much so that he quits his job and heads to the beach where he used to hang out, impressing the lifeguards there with his strength and getting a new job as a trainee. But when his family tries to go to the beach, he starts enforcing the anti-Valley rules there and forces them away. Once confronted about choosing his career over his family, he chooses his career, as there's a competition coming up that he views as a chance for a promotion, though he'll have to miss Beth's birthday party to go. During the competition, his robotic limbs malfunction, as they're not waterproof, and he's kicked off the force, until one of the lifeguards starts to drown and he's the only one thin enough to save her. But after realizing how much the limbs have changed his outlook, he decides to discard the suit and go back to the way things were. Father of the Bribe. Biff and Chip finally get their driver's license, and although Bob tries to teach them that the car comes with responsibilities, they drag race against the Hill Kids anyway, and the car is totaled. After seeing Bob attempt to ride the bus, the twins feel bad about wrecking the car, so they go to a police auction to get a new one and end up buying a sedan that happened to have the mayor's bribe money stashed inside. Upon realizing that they're now rich, the boys begin to spend on frivolous things, completely ignoring their father's attempts to teach them about the value of money and responsibility, because they're too rich for those lessons to apply. But the city employees, who didn't receive their kickback from the mayor, realize that the Oblong family has their money, and so they begin to harass the family by cutting off the heat, dumping garbage on the lawn, and releasing feral animals into the chimney. Biff and Chip host a party at the gym to get out of the house, and while there, Milo accidentally ignites their money pile. The blaze causes them to become poor again, and the firefighters won't put it out because they still haven't gotten their bribe. Though when Bob pleads for some sanity, the whole valley is moved and they all pitch in to give the mayor his bribe money. Everybody who is normal in the same way, but everyone who's different is different uniquely. Yet paradoxically, the openly different or weird among society tend to be the least obsessed with that difference. When two normal people meet, they begin to scrutinize the other to find out that hopefully they're the more well-adjusted of the two. But if two oddballs see each other, they know it's not them anyway. And so the weird tend to get along with one another, if only because they immediately empathize with the struggles that that person must have been through. As such, there's a sense that freaks have to stick together. The Oblongs was a weird show about weird people, and it was likely enjoyed by other weird people who felt at home. Not that the show made them feel normal, although you certainly are by comparison, but that it made the weirdness seem less so. Because ultimately, weirdness can't be defined without normalcy. Being normal is being boring and worrying about whether or not you fit in, but when you're weird, you don't fit in anywhere, and you're used to forming your own niche, used to being an adapter. And then none of these experiences are any less than universal. In all of the conversation about weird people and normal people, I don't think there's anybody out there who truly is normal. Everybody is weird in some way. Everybody has something shameful that would make them stand out. Some are better at hiding it than others, but nobody really is the pristine, regular guy that they assume they have to be. That is normal, to be weird. Because you're either weird or you're not you. The more you try to fit in, the less of an identity you'll wind up having. Normal is a societal idea, and what's normal in one year might certainly not be in another. So The Oblongs is a weird show, and practically everything else is too. That's what makes the world interesting, is that nothing and nobody really is mainstream. We all just arbitrarily decided what kind of standards nobody should live up to. The Oblongs never found the mainstream success it was supposed to have, but that's arguably not so big a deal today. If it was more popular, then perhaps it wouldn't have been as interesting of a show. If they watered down some of the more abrasive aspects even more, then we wouldn't remember it today. Regardless of what the expectations were from networks, The Oblongs was not a popular show. It was a good show, and weird is good. While the Debbies slept, Helga snipped off their annoying little heads. Then, she ate all of the pizza crusts. The end.